Summer 1989. On a narrow peninsula between two firths north of Inverness, 6 red kites were released into the sky. Scotland was returning a predator it had killed 110 years earlier. No living Scottish person had ever seen the species in flight over this land. 6 was a beginning. By 1994, there would be 93. And then something would begin that no one standing in that field on that July morning had anticipated. In the 15th century, red kites were part of London's urban infrastructure. Not a beautiful part, a useful one. They circled over markets, picked carrion from the cobblestones, and snatched scraps directly from the hands of passers-by. London at that time had neither sewers nor refuse collection, and a bird that ate the dead was as indispensable as a butcher's knife. To kill a kite in 14th or 15th century England was to violate a royal edict. The punishment could be a fine. Or worse. In Scotland, things went differently. In 1457, James II declared the kite a pest and ordered it to be killed wherever found. But even without that edict, even where the bird remained protected, change came with the expansion of shooting estates in the 18th century. Estate managers saw a threat to game in every predator. They paid for tails, for pairs of talons. The Parliamentary Vermin Act of 1566 opened official persecution of 36 species, and the kite was on the list. But the bird left behind something more concrete than edicts. Kites lined their nests with rubbish, and not just any rubbish. Nests that have been found contained a glove, a small bag, a crisp packet, a sock. In The Winter's Tale of 1611, Shakespeare wrote, "When the kite builds, look to lesser linen." This is not a metaphor, it is a naturalist's observation written in the form of advice to a neighbor. In London at the time, the bird was so familiar that its habits had entered everyday speech. Shakespeare mentions the kite 7 times, and never with admiration. In King Lear, he compares a treacherous daughter to one. In Coriolanus, London is called a city of kites and crows, not as an image, but as topography. Today, at Argotty Farm in Stirlingshire, the owners hang a rope threaded with scraps of fabric in the kitchen garden. The birds steal them and carry them to the nest. There are 400 years between these two ropes. The behavior is identical. By the 1870s, it was over. The last pair to nest in England and Scotland did not return. 5 pairs remained in the Welsh mountains for the whole of Britain. By the 1930s, there were fewer still, and a genetic analysis in 1997 revealed what no one had known precisely at the time. The entire Welsh population of that period had probably descended from a single female who survived the worst year. Then the numbers began to recover, very slowly, to 52 pairs by 1989, when ornithologists began to speak of reintroduction. 52 pairs after 5 pairs is progress. But a person who has never seen 600 pairs over Scotland considers 52 to be normal. Every new generation begins its count from the number it was born into. Peter Halliwell managed a farm on the slopes near the Black Isle. He knew these birds only from his father's stories, bad stories. Kites, the old men said, took lambs, chicks, small rabbits. When in 1989 the RSPB announced the start of the program, Halliwell was among those who signed the petition against it. Not out of hatred, but out of logic. He lived by the sheep. Sheep were money. A predator appearing over the field was a risk. "We are not a laboratory for your experiments," farmers said at meetings with ornithologists. Their argument was not groundless. No one had ever returned the kite to Scotland after such an absence. No one knew how the species would behave in a modern landscape, more intensively farmed, more built up, with a different composition of livestock. The first year showed that some birds did approach enclosures containing lambs. One farmer counted 2 carcasses, but the vet subsequently established that both lambs had died of disease before the kites had found them. They were scavengers, with talons too weak to kill even an adult rabbit. But at the time, the farmers did not know that. Nor did the ornithologists have the figures, only theory. The second voice of opposition sounded differently, and it too had an internal logic. Shooting estate managers argued that kites would disturb pheasants, scatter partridges, interfere with the nesting of game that was the very basis for the estate's existence. Their business depended on bird density on a specific piece of land, and any aerial predator, even one that hunted almost exclusively dead mice and earthworms, was categorically unwelcome. One estate manager on the Rossshire coast wrote to the local newspaper that a scavenging bird over the field is not nature, it is provocation. In late 1991, several Black Isle landowners raised the question of terminating the program. At a meeting of one district council, the vote ended in a tie, 7-7. The first nests appeared in 1992, 3 years after the start. Ian Carter, an RSPB ornithologist, was keeping a daily observation journal at the time and remembers seeing the number in his field notebook for the first time, 11 breeding pairs. He looked again, he later said in an interview, and he thought, "Is this a mistake?" It was not a mistake. The birds were breeding faster than any of the models had predicted. Ornithologists had expected kites to begin nesting in year 3. Some started in year 2, some in year 1. This was unprecedented for the species. By the late 1990s, researchers had calculated the survival rates of birds across 2 parallel programs, the Scottish one on the Black Isle and the English one in the Chiltern Hills. Both had started in 1989. Both had released 93 birds. But after 10 years, the difference was striking. The Chiltern population had grown to several hundred pairs, while the Scottish one had stalled below 100. Researchers checked the food supply, the same. Checked nesting success, the same. Then they reviewed mortality data from 1999 to 2006 and found the answer. 166 kites from the Black Isle over those 7 years had died from poison baits, laid deliberately, not as a side effect. A study by Smart and co-authors, published in 2010 in Biological Conservation, established that the rate of illegal persecution fully explained the difference in growth rates between the 2 populations. Duncan Orr Ewing, when he saw that analysis, said one thing: "These are the same birds." In spring 2014, what had existed for years as a statistic became a spectacle. Within an area of less than 3 square kilometers near Conan Bridge on the Black Isle, 16 kites and 6 buzzards were found, all dead, all poisoned. This was not coincidence. 16 birds, a sixth of all kites illegally killed in Scotland over the previous 20 years, had disappeared in a single spring. Police opened an investigation, conducted searches, and closed the case 3 years later without a single charge. Ornithologist Brian Etheridge, who personally found most of the carcasses during those days, said in 2024, "Deeply, deeply frustrating, and I suspect that whoever was responsible is still living nearby." In the winter of 2013, a University of Reading student named Melanie Oros was driving with her supervisor to work through the suburbs, not through a field, not through a forest, urban housing. Her supervisor, Mark Fellows, suddenly slowed the car and pointed out of the window. Above the rooftops, 3 kites, then 2 more. He said, "There are more here than on the motorway." Oros set aside her dissertation on garden bird feeders and began looking at kites instead. They drove around Reading, a city of 100,000 people, 100 square kilometers of urban development with no dedicated feeding stations for raptors. And they counted birds, more in residential areas than in fields, far more. Oros conducted a household survey. Up to 5% of Reading's residents were regularly leaving food in their gardens for kites. Deliberately. Not for sparrows, for kites. People who had never considered themselves conservationists had, with no organizational prompting, recreated something that had existed in medieval London, a bird and a city in symbiosis. In 1992, farmer Chris Powell and his father held 200 acres near Rhyaider in Wales. The family spaniel systematically flushed rabbits and kites, of which Wales then had just over 50 pairs, began gathering near the run. Powell started putting out scraps of meat for them. Simply. Without permission, without a plan. Then the RSPB called and asked for an urgent meeting. Powell was certain he was about to be fined for contact with a protected species. Instead, the organization offered to make him the first official kite feeding center in Britain. He agreed. Today, Gigran Farm receives up to 2,500 birds a week, up to 600 in a single afternoon. Powell recalled that one of the first things he did when the feeding center was running was invite the local Women's Institute for a free viewing. Most of the participants were wives of farmers opposed to the program. Sheep grazed in the same field where the kites descended. No sheep was harmed. Some of those women later became volunteers. The University of Reading published a study in 2025 using isotopic analysis of bones from medieval kites found at sites in Oxford and Winchester. The chemical signatures of the birds' bones matched those of the people who had lived nearby so closely that researcher Juliet Waterman said some kites showed evidence of a diet consisting entirely of human waste. The bird that had been hunted as vermin turned out to have been literally part of the human ecosystem 1,000 years ago, and now, again. In 1996, the RSPB released 19 birds in central Scotland near Down in Stirlingshire. In 2001, 104 birds were released in Dumfries and Galloway. From 2007 to 2009, 101 birds were released near Aberdeen. Each new program used birds already born in the wild in Scotland, or descendants of the Chiltern population. Alongside this, there was action in Ireland. In 2007, the Irish government announced the import of at least 100 birds from Wales. In 2010, the first successful nesting in Northern Ireland in almost 200 years was recorded. In 2022, the flow went into reverse for the first time. Spain, the country that in 1989 had provided the birds to start the entire program, asked for help because the population in the Pyrenees was declining. English ornithologists sent kites back, descendants of those very same Spanish birds that 33 years earlier had been brought to the Chiltern Hills. By 2022, between 15 and 17% of the world's red kite population was living in Great Britain. From 0 to 6,000 breeding pairs in 33 years. Alongside this, something appeared that no ornithologist had planned: a tourism economy. In 2001, several farms in Dumfries and Galloway opened feeding stations, places where birds were fed meat each day at 2 in the afternoon. Tourists began to come. In 2017, the RSPB calculated that visitors to the Galloway Kite Trail had spent £8.2 million in the region over the trail's lifetime. Over 100,000 people in total. Argatai Farm in Stirlingshire, where the first wild kites began appearing in 1996 of their own accord with no invitation, now runs daily ranger-led tours. Neil and Lynn Bowsers, whose family has held this land since 1916, had not planned to become a conservation center. The birds simply arrived. In spring 2023, school children in the town of Carterton, Oxfordshire, found an injured bird near the school entrance. The wings would not hold. Someone called the local bird rescue, Chrissy Gaines, who rehabilitates owls and hawks. She took the bird in and treated its injuries. 2 days later, it died. Then she noticed a ring on its leg and passed the number to ornithologists. The answer came within days. The bird had been ringed in 1994 as a chick in Spain, in the region of Aragon, before being sent to the Chilterns. It had been named Aragon. Its age at death was 29 years, 3 years more than the previous longevity record for a wild kite in Great Britain. No ornithologist had known it was still alive until Chrissy had copied the number from the ring. It was born in Spain, lived 30 years in England, and died outside a school where the children had probably never heard its name. A few months later, a woman named Bev Forbes found the remains of another bird on a road near Dingwall in Scotland, struck by vehicles. The ring showed it had been ringed by Roy Dennis on the Black Isle in 1993. 30 years. Another record no one had known about. On the Black Isle, the situation is more complicated. In 2024, the population reached approximately 450 breeding pairs across Scotland, but illegal poisoning has not stopped. In April 2024, a walker found a dead kite near a forest path close to Spinningdale in East Sutherland. Analysis confirmed carbofuran, a pesticide banned for over 20 years. 1/4 of a teaspoon kills a human being. No one has been arrested. The case is open. November, the Black Isle. 18 birds above a single field. They have come from the direction of the firth and are rising in spirals, rust red against a gray sky, forked tails, wings still. The wind holds them. Below, an empty field. No one there. Only the birds in the wind, and a movement that does not stop.